JJK 260 is already an all-time chapter. Absolute insanity. The fandom is going crazy with theories, questions, the works, right? And unfortunately, I've been out of town all weekend, so I have a massive stockpile of questions from you guys. So in this video, we're going to go through them. All right, so to kick things off here, we've got several questions about Todo, and for all of the questions in this video, I recommend you pause and read them if you would like to, but let's start at the top here with how strong is current Todo? And honestly, he is a menace, man. Todo is a beast. You guys already know he's one of my favorite characters, and I mean, he's proven against the main adversaries of this manga that he is built different. So he's not special grade because we know that special grade means you have to be able to take on a country by yourself, and Boogie Woogie is just not the technique for that. But if we push that definition aside and just want to consider special grades as like a tier of fighter, I think Todo is absolutely there. The next question here is, what are my thoughts on his new musket tool, his doohickey, his thingamajig, aka the Vibra Slap, which is a real instrument, by the way. So for those of you that didn't see my video already breaking down Todo's new binding vow and his instrument, check that out. But I love it. I think it's amazing. And what's hilarious is in Japan, the Vibra Slap has already become an Amazon bestseller. People are wanting to check this thing out. Now, these next two questions here are very similar, and they're asking about Todo's binding vow and basically how is he able to get so much more powerful? What's the downside? And again, if you haven't seen my binding vow video, check that out. It's going to be a good place to start. But the downside is that, first of all, Todo doesn't have a hand, right? He replaced it with a Vibra Slap. Now, you might be saying, well, he already didn't have a hand. But we don't know the specifications of how the binding vow worked. Todo could have still, like, utilized that to his advantage, saying, like, in this binding vow, I will never clap again. Even though he can't clap again, he still may be able to trade that in a binding vow. But even beyond that, in the binding vow, he trades number of claps for more powerful effects. So think back to Todo when he had two hands, right? He clapped once, he got a swap. Now he's basically saying, I'm going to clap 50 times in a row to get a more powerful swap. In Todo with two hands, that would be a huge downside, right? Because he's going to have to sit there for like 3 minutes just clapping before he gets a single slap. But thanks to his genius in adding the Vibra Slap and changing the conditions to its reverberation, he now has 50 claps a second, right? So his binding vow is essentially, all right, I'm going to trade 20 claps to be able to swap two people at once. I'm going to be able to trade 40 slaps to be able to swap somebody a super far distance. And he has basically, again, just found a shortcut through that via the Vibra Slap. And this is something we've seen Sukuna do the entire manga, right? He is the master of binding vows and creating himself little shortcuts that aren't really downsides to him. For example, the world cutting slash. When he sent that against Gojo, he traded future requirements. But those future requirements were really nothing to him because he was going to have 4 arms. So Todo is doing something similar. Oh, and also, would it be theoretically possible for Todo to do a soul swap? I don't think so. It obviously makes a lot of sense, but I think since Gege already gave Ui Ui that ability, it would feel weird for Todo to be able to do it as well. I think he would have just made Todo the one to do it if he was gonna let Todo do it. So I don't think so. Next up, we got a few questions revolving around Gojo, starting with this one wondering if Gaku Ganji could have had a hand in bringing back some of the people that fell in battle via cursed corpses. And I'm certainly waiting for that shoe to drop. That seems like a plot thread that will get picked up, the fact that Yaga gave that secret away, but I don't necessarily see it coming into play with Gojo because in that last panel, it was Gojo, right? It wasn't a cursed corpse, seemingly, at least insofar as it wasn't Panda or another weird like stuffed animal that we've seen the cursed corpses be in the past. So I don't think it will be utilized in that way. Like I don't think we'll combine 3 souls to make some super soldier, but I could see it coming up in the epilogue or just at some point in the story, but not really like to bring Gojo back. Now this next question wants to know if in that final panel it really only shows Gojo with one eye, so why might that be the case? I think there's basically 2 options here. One, it's either just aesthetic. Gege has drawn Gojo with a focus on one eye more times than I can count, so it could just be alluding to that. Or it could be alluding to the fact that he perhaps gave up one of his eyes in a binding vow to return. This has been one of the most popular theories about a Gojo return, him sacrificing either one or both of these 6 eyes in order to make his comeback somehow. So I would lean either of those directions, honestly. And then finally, do I think Kenjaku could possess Gojo if he did sacrifice the 6 eyes? I think it's possible, But at this point in the story, I don't really see that being the way Gege is going to go. I think that, if that was Kenjaku in the final panel, it raises a lot of questions, like why that moment. So, theoretically possible, sure, but I don't think that's where the story's going. All right, next up, we got this one on what if we had all those breaks because Gege was waiting 236 days to write Gojo's comeback. And I'm leaning that this would be more coincidence than anything else. I haven't seen anybody actually prove this yet, so I'd be interested to see where this number is coming from, because you would need to go from official chapter release to official chapter release and not like based on leaks days or anything like that. But yeah, for those of you that don't know, 236 would be in reference to chapter 236, which is where Gojo got his 50% discount. So if this was true and it was exactly that amount of days, then, it could be intentional from Gege. But again, I might lean more coincidence, because I feel like if he was going to do something like that, it would be a more significant number. Like maybe something relating to Buddhism or just some deeper symbolism aside from just the chapter that Gojo went away in. But I don't know. I'm interested to see if this is actually true or not. Next, we got, what do I think about the possibility of Yuji using the fire arrow? Yeah, I think that would be insanely hype. I've talked a little bit about it in some previous videos, specifically wondering about what his fire arrow would look like, since, his cleave and dismantle are different, more modernized with the scissors. What might the fire arrow be? But yeah, I hope we get to see him use it. I feel like we probably will. It just seems like too much of an interesting moment to not show, especially that he has awakened Shrine now. So yeah, maybe it'll be the final blow. I don't know. Maybe he'll use it against the merger, but I do expect to see it, and I have high hopes for that moment. Next, we got this question on curse technique burnout, which is the process of after you cast a domain and it finishes or it's shattered, you can no longer use your curse technique for a time because it's on cooldown, basically, right? So the specific question here is wondering, why can you use the curse technique in the domain, and it's only once it stops that it suddenly goes on cooldown? So this is a good question. I've gotten variations of this a lot, and the way I understand it is when you cast a domain, you are imbuing your curse technique into the barrier. So you're basically shifting the burden of using the curse technique to your domain. So yes, you are using your curse technique in the domain. It's happening all around you, sure hit effect, all that jazz, right? So it's basically not you using it in the domain, it's the domain, but you're still in control of it, if that makes sense. And I know that's kind of just like getting into semantics, but I believe that's how it works. And therefore, when the domain shatters, you now have lost all access to the curse technique because it's still on cooldown from you casting the domain. But again, it's usable in the domain because the domain is the one handling it. All right, next up we have, what are my predictions for next chapter? I think we're going to find out what this Gojo thing is, right? Is it actually him? Is it a hallucination? Is it the product of somebody's curse technique? Regardless of the answer, Sukuna doesn't seem to be in a fantastic spot right here. So I could see the activation of the merger coming shortly, perhaps Uraume swooping in to lend him a hand, maybe swapping back to Hikari and Uraume to see what they've been up to. I expect things to escalate really quickly from here on. Next, we have, did Hikari teach Yuta how to move his domain? I love that. I think that makes a lot of sense. We know Hikari could do it, so I certainly think he could have lent that information to Akotsu, right? I don't think this means they would have had to swap for him to teach him. That feels like something he could just like explain was possible to Yuta, and then he could do it. But yeah, I think that makes sense. Next, for Yuta, Ghost of the Strongest. Could that have been him in that final panel? And I talked about this in some of my previous videos. I personally don't think so, just because it looked like Gojo. Those eyes were unmistakable, which, yeah, maybe Yuta got the 6 eyes somehow, but I think that's less likely than it just being Gojo. And, could it be a hallucination or a curse technique? Sure, but I think the implication is that it is Gojo in that final panel. Next up, why did Sukuna use the Unlimited Void hand sign at the end of 260? Well, if you recall, he actually did this the previous time he opened his domain as well in 258, I believe, and that's because he had to find a new path to opening the domain. He's missing 2 of his hands on one side, which means he can't do his domain sign, so he basically copied that from Gojo. Next, what's the deal with Yuji's claw hands? We still don't know, but my presumption has always been that those are a product of eating the Curse Womb death painting, so some form of blood manipulation that he got from that is my best guess. And then finally, for this set of questions we have, does chapter 194 imply that Mai was essayed by Naoya? And I think that's definitely the implication he was trying to give off, but whether that means it's true or not, I don't know. He might have just been trying to get under Maki's skin in that moment. So next up, we've got a Nobara theory, and this poses that she is still alive and that information is being intentionally hidden from Yuji and us, in the same way that Gojo hid Yuji being alive earlier on in the story, so that they could use that to their advantage. And Todo just brought up how he wanted to keep his plan a secret from Yuji so that Sukuna wouldn't find out. So maybe the exact same thing is going on with Nobara. She could come back, use her resonance at an integral part in order to damage Sukuna due to the way it works. And I could certainly see something like that. And especially that would explain why her fate has been kept so vague over the course of this story, because it was intentionally being held from Yuji. So I like that a lot. I definitely think she could come back. And again, her technique could prove very useful. And a lot of people have thought she could use it on a Sukuna finger, but I think a poetic use would be to use it on Yuji. If, by hitting Yuji, you will then hit Sukuna due to that soul resonance. So yeah, I could certainly see that happening. I don't think it must happen, but I do love that parallel with Yuji's death and Nobara's death. So yeah, I like this. Next up, we have a multi-parter, but they're basically all in this same vein dealing with Nobara, in that are Sukuna's fingers his actual fingers from the Heian era? And yes, I believe so. When Kenjaku taught Sukuna how to do this, he wanted to do it into 20 different pieces, so he used his fingers as the target for that technique, if you will. So I do think they are counted as part of his body, and I do theoretically think that Nobara could use her technique on them, which that's the point he's getting to. If there is another finger out there, could she potentially use this on it? And I do think so, but again, I think it would be more poetic if she used it on Yuji. And we can't forget about the third member of the trio, so this next question is about Megumi, and specifically this moment in 173 where Reggie might curse him with his last words, right? Where he says, "Let fate toy with you, become a clown, and pass away." And seemingly these things are kind of happening, right? Fate has obviously been toying with Megumi. He's arguably become a clown insofar as he is just being used by Sukuna, and might he ultimately pass away? I think that's definitely possible. That would be a tragic ending for Megumi, but this is Gege Akutami we're talking about, so I wouldn't put it past him. But me personally, I hope that Yuji is able to save and redeem Megumi. Well, save Megumi and then he can kind of redeem himself. Not that he needs redemption, but just have a nice moment after all of these L's, right? And then not ultimately pass away. And again, if you haven't seen my video on the ending of JJK via the whole only one will die or only one will live situation, I think that it would be more poetic and kind of a full circle moment if Yuji is the one to pass away after successfully saving Megumi. So that's my hope. But really, I do think this is on the table. So we'll have to see. Finally, for this video, I got asked if I could explain what it means to have more or less cursed energy, specifically in reference to the Gojo versus Sukuna fight, because we know that Sukuna has potentially 3 or 4 times the amount of cursed energy that Gojo does, and yet that didn't seem to make a difference. So why? And specifically in that case, it's because it's Gojo, right? He has the 6 eyes, which make him insanely efficient at using cursed energy. It's said that when Gojo activates a technique, he basically loses no cursed energy. And again, that's all thanks to the 6 eyes. So that is why Gojo was able to basically even the playing field with Sukuna, even though he has far less total cursed energy. He's just that much more efficient. But if we're talking about not Gojo, then yes, Sukuna would have a huge advantage. And that's basically because cursed energy is the battery for your techniques, right? The more you have, the more you're going to be able to do. Also, you use it for cursed energy reinforcement and, healing and all that stuff, right? And obviously in the case of healing, it's reverse curse technique, but you're still using your cursed energy supply to power that. So I would say in 99% of cases, yes, somebody that has 4 times the amount, as long as they're like actually skilled, that's going to be an enormous advantage for them. But Gojo is the exception, right? The 6 eyes make him just a phenom of efficiency. Anyways, y'all, that's going to do it to this one. Massive shout out to everybody who donated and asked questions for this video. I appreciate y'all, and I also appreciate your patience with me as I was out of town this weekend and wasn't able to upload as much as I wanted to. But we got videos coming down the pipeline, and we have a huge chapter seemingly coming up in a few days here. So be sure to let me know your thoughts, theories, and predictions, and I will see you in the next one.